Ya Ali. Lots of changes, eh? Now I get this. Just a day before I want to leave, right? I request to recite Surah Al-Fatiha, please, for a sick person. Ya Hayy Ya Qayyum. Bismillah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء وأعز المرسلين حبيب إله العالمين العبد المؤيد والنور المسدد المصطفى الأمجد أبي القاسم محمد صلى الله عليه وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين أما بعد فيقول الحق وقوله الصدق في محكم التنزيل بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وعباد الرحمن الذين يمشون على الأرض هونا وإذا خاطبهم الجاهلون قالوا سلاما صدق الله العلي العظيم آمنا بالله ورسله. To hasten the reappearance of our awaited Imam عجل الله تعالى فرجه الشريف, I request we recite 3 salawat with the loudest of our voices. Respected brothers and sisters in Islam, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. When one looks into the works of the scholars of history who documented the lives of the Ahlul Bayt, one would notice that the scholars separated the lives of the Ahlul Bayt into 2 different eras. The first era began with Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi, up until the martyrdom of Imam al-Hussein salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. The second era began with the children of Imam Hussein alayhi salam and arguably extended, and according to us, it's still extending until the blessed reappearance of our awaited Imam Ajjalallahu ta'ala farajahu al-Sharif. Allahumma salli ala According to their opinion, such scholars, they say that the difference between those 2 eras is that during the first era, that began, as we said, with Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, up until the martyrdom of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, the Ahlul Bayt, and mainly the Imams, were politically active. And they even entered the political spectrum, and they took a part in many political conflicts. Why? Simply because the Ahlul Bayt felt that, according to the scholars, of course, the academics, because the Ahlul Bayt felt that they have the right in the Khilafah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam, because they consider themselves the successors of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam and the heirs of the Risala. As for the second era, such academics say that we'd notice that the lives of the Imams, beginning with Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam, that you would notice that the Imams did not take a part in the political spectrum. So for example, they did not engage in any political activities. They did not take a part in any of the political conflicts that occurred in the Ummah. Now, regardless whether we agree with this opinion or not, but one cannot help but notice that even within the Shia school of thought, there has been such type of a separation. As you may notice, some scholars might come and say that in the Ahlul Bayt school of thought, We do not have an opinion that comes and says that you can form any type of an Islamic government during the time of ghaiba. Why? Because they believe that in an Islamic government, a hukuma should be only ruled by an infallible imam. Some other scholars come and say what? They come and say yes. To have a perfect Islamic government, of course you need an infallible imam to rule. Yet, since the ghaiba of our awaited imam has extended already, then what do we do in this case? Is that there's an option, and the option is to establish a foundation for our awaited imam. They depend on what? They depend on the opinion that there are two types of muntadirun or muntadirin. So there are two types of people that await the imam. The first type are the ones that just patiently await the imam. They believe in him in their heart and in their aqidah. The second type are the ones who strive and struggle on the path to establish something for the imam, or even try to strive on a personal level to be with the imam upon the belief that I will be with the imam, ajjalallahu ta'ala farajahu sharif. And the wonderful part is that such opinions, or this conflict in opinions, it stayed in the academic field. You would notice that our scholars are academics. They actually upheld the ethics of the debates, and they upheld the ethics of difference of thought, difference of opinions, and it stayed in the academic field. You don't find it extended to become on the same level that you see sometimes from the followers of the scholars. Is that it's really sad that sometimes people are really differentiating on such issues when there are greater matters to worry about. And believe it or not, this is not my topic tonight in particular, but I just wanted to make that point, that so we can enter into the life of Imam Zain al-Abidin salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi and answer the question, was Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam not involved in politics as such academics claim? Yet going back to what I just said, is that you would notice that such conflict in opinion and thought stayed in the books, it stayed in opinion. No one accused the other of this. No one, for example, accused the other of being something else, you know what I'm trying to say? Or took the other person out of tashayyu'. Or for example, you would find that the era of the conflict of thought between who? Shaheed Mutahari rahmatullahi alayh and Dr. Ali Shari'ati rahmatullahi alayh, is that Dr. Ali Shari'ati had an opinion and Shaheed Mutahari would come and he would reply to that opinion with his books. And honestly, we had a beautiful culture of both books that exposes you to both theories and both thoughts. So it stays like that, because the majority is sometimes that you find right now, which I personally do not understand. Now, I understand that it's a concept of curiosity. Many people are curious about certain things. But I feel that there are certain topics being discussed, be it on the minbar or off the minbar or amongst the community, or even in Q&As amongst some youngsters about topics that absolutely do not concern us whatsoever, or even topics that have nothing to do, for example, with the reality of the challenges that we are facing in the West. Is that there are more challenges that are worthy to reflect upon and try to rise with this community. On the other hand, you find that even within those topics, they are discussed on a scholarly level, right? You notice, for example, there's always that drift. Oh, what is wilayatul faqih and what is the Islamic hukuma and so forth. I personally love the opinion of Ayatollah Jawadi Amuli. May Allah lengthen his life. Ayatollah Jawadi Amuli mentions in one of his books he answers questions about the concept of wilayat al-faqih. But the beautiful thing about this book is what? Is that he comes and says that it is sad. Focus on the words of Ayatollah Jawadi Amuli. He said, it is sad that there are people that only finish sutuh ulya in Hawza. Sutuh ulya is your masters. You know, you study your muqaddimat, your bachelor's. Sutuh ulya is your masters and your doctorate degree, your PhD. And then bahth al-kharij is your PhD. Ayatollah Jawadi Amuli, what does he say? He says that if a person finishes he said it is sad that a person that only finished Sutuh Ulya is discussing the concept of Wilayat al-Faqih, be it with it or against it. Could you imagine? So even if you have a master's in Hawza, according to Ayatollah Jawadi Amuli, that you're not worthy enough to discuss this topic, whether to prove it or not to prove it even. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? So sometimes such topics, basically they are not really making us advance as a community in that regard. Now yes, knowledge is wonderful and it is worthy to understand this and to each his own marja. But to create a conflict to the point that we start labeling each other, yes? This is, for example, I don't know, Sistani. This is Shirazi. This is Khomeini. This is Bengali. This is, you know what? It's always like this. One person asked me one time, I was lecturing somewhere. He said, so what are you, Khomeini or Shirazi? I said, I'm Lubnani. I'm neither nor, you know, because both of them are cities, you know what I mean? There's the city of, what does that have to do with anything? And you would notice that even it became an importance to understand that even a scholar or a sheikh or a speaker, and sometimes you might understand where the community is coming from, because the conflict has gotten to a level where it is uncontrollable anymore. It's not uncontrolled anymore, it's out of control. Is that you find that people are really attacking each other. And mashallah, right now with the expansion of social media, you find those keyboard heroes that all their job is to attack each other on social media, which is pretty sad. So nevertheless, understanding that, you know what, academics had difference of opinions on that. Some of our Shia scholars, they said that yes, that doesn't mean they did not deny that our imams were involved in politics. No, in fact, if you understand that beginning from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and even with Imam al-Zaman Ajjallah Ta'ala Faraj al-Sharif, is that all of their struggle, a huge part of it is political, whether we like it or not. For example, when I hear the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam saying, أولنا Muhammad, وأوسطنا Muhammad, وآخرنا اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Meaning what? Meaning just like I, Rasulullah, began a government and I started something, a movement and a message, and it had a government. The same thing with Imam al-Zaman Ajjallah Ta'ala Faraj al-Sharif. So yes, it is important to educate yourself politically. There's absolutely no doubt. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again, that no, it's impossible to say that religion is separated from politics. No. Now, but to what extent and what do I have to get involved in? That's a different argument and a different story. But every person needs to understand the concept of politics, what is going around in the world. That is very important to understand in this regard. And one of those imams, that was, when we look into his life, Imam Zain al-Abidin salawatullah wa salam alayhi, when academics, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil farajah, when academics came and spoke and documented the life of Imam Zain al-Abidin, the first thing that comes to our mind as soon as we hear the name of Imam al-Sajjad is what? Is ibadah, isn't it? Is that the Imam was a abid, he was a zahid, and it's almost like as if he's pictured in some writings as if he was a person that absolutely isolated himself and was just praying day and night. And there's even some would suggest that the Imam, even within his very minimum involvement, yet his main focus was ibadah. So what I want to do tonight, resulting from this introduction, is to further discuss this topic and touch upon it briefly, because today we were asked to limit it to a very short period of time. So I don't know, I cannot sometimes control myself. When I start, I don't know when to stop, but inshallah, well, we'll try my best to restrict to the time so we can give a chance for the Q&A, which I personally believe, of course, there's a lot benefit and thawab in such amal in particular. Now, on the other hand, so we would notice that the life of Imam Zain al-Abidin is documented in this regard. For example, we look at his works such as Sahif al-Sajjadiyya, the a'mal that your community are notorious for, mashallah, the a'mal that we do on Layal al-Qadr, and the other a'mal are also from Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam. I mean, each one of us have came across a dua of Imam Zain al-Abidin salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi. And one thing that one cannot help but notice is that the wonderful thing about the du'as of our imams in general, and in particular, for example, dua Abu Hamza al-Thamali. Notice the beautiful thing about that dua is that the imam, it's almost not only he is living inside your heart, but no, he's even articulating what you want to say to Allah, but you just don't know how to put it in words. And this is the beautiful thing about the ad'iyah of the ma'sumin, that you feel that the ma'sumin are speaking on your behalf. There isn't one person here that does not read a dua from a ma'sum, that does not feel that, you know what, this is what I've been wanting to say for ages. And this is the miraculous part. And this is the eloquence of the ma'soom. This is the status of this is the level that they are raised on such a high level of the divine revelation that they know how to purely speak to Allah. Notice, for example, in the dua of Nabi Musa, what did he say when Allah told him that? اذهبا إلى فرعون إنه طغى. Go to Fir'aun and preach to Fir'aun. What does Nabi Musa alayhi salam say? رب اشرح لي صدري. Right? Allah, expand my chest with ease. وَيَسِّرْ لِي أَمْرِي. And then make my matters easy. وَحْلُلْ عُقْدَةً. Allah. You see, I want you to make my tongue eloquent. Meaning what? See, many people came and say, some mufassirin, is that because Nabi Musa did not have a very clear speech. No. When you come and focus on these verses, is that those du'as are connected one after the other. The first du'a, رَبِّ اشْرَحْ لِي صَدْرِي وَيَسِّرْ لِي أَمْرِي وَحْلُلْ عُقْدَةً مِنْ لِسَانِي. Meaning what? The title of Nabi Musa alayhi salam is Kalimul Ahsantum. He is Kalimullah, isn't he? Right. When you are used to speak to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, do you think it's easy to go and start communicating with a person like Fir'aun? It's not easy. Why? Because you are used on a certain level of speech. You've already spoken to Fir'aun in this, you have already been speaking to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala all your life. Your title is Kalimullah, the one who speaks to Allah. So you're used to a certain grammar, a certain level of eloquence. And then all of a sudden now you're asked to go speak to who? The Fir'aun, right? And this is the sad part sometimes. Because this is what, for example, Imam Amir al-Mu'minin alayhi salam expressed in one of his famous traditions when he says what? مَا جَادَلْتُ عَالِمًا أو ما ناقشت عالما إلا وغلبته. Is that there isn't a time that I debated with a scholar except that I was able to defeat him in the debate. But every time I debated an ignorant, is that he's the one who defeated me. Because of course he's ignorant. It's really hard to communicate with this level of ignorance. So therefore you've noticed that in Nabi Musa alayhi salam, that's what he meant. With the Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam and our Imams, this is the status of eloquence that they are used to. Speaking to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. One of the titles of Sayyid al-Zahra alayhi salam is what? Al-Muhaddatha. Right? The one who is spoken to. And that's why when you focus on the sermon of Sayyid al-Zahra salawatullahi wa salam alayha, which I really think, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad, which I really think that these are the things that we should, these are the matters that we should focus on. Because believe it or not, it's the sermons of the Ahlul Bayt that explain to us what do we need to do. What is our taklif? What is our wajib in the time of the ghaibah? It is important. Sayyidah Zainab alayha salam memorized the sermon of Sayyidah Zahra alayha salam when she was about 6 years of age. And the chain of narrators go back to Sayyidah Zainab alayhi salam and even Jabir ibn Abdullah al-Ansari. But to understand that these are the things that are worthy to focus on, rather than wasting our time to understand that who is this person, what is this theory, why did it come, and so forth, then why don't we focus on the troubles and the tribulations we're facing in the West? And it's as if that we're not facing any drug issues, for instance, right? Or any issues for the youngsters in the West, for instance. These are the ones that are worthy to focus on. So going back to what we said, you would notice that this is the type of speech of the Ahlul Bayt within their works. And one of the beautiful narrations by Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says what? Is that when it will be the day of Qiyamah, there will be a voice heard on behalf of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying what? Where is Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam? And then my son Ali ibn al-Hussein will arise and walk through the lines and approach the door of Jannah. So you would notice that Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam was complimented with his ibadah. So let's further dissect this topic tonight depending on the following points. The first one, let's reflect back on the verse that we started with, that is called the verse of Ibadul Rahman, the servants of the most compassionate, and highlight the characteristics mentioned in the verse that describes the Ibadul Rahman. Who are they and what do they do? Number two, let's reflect on the life of Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam briefly and see that was he a person that only dedicated himself purely for ibadah, and if yes, what kind of ibadah, right? And is ibadah only rituals of worship, or no, even social activity in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is considered also a sense of ibadah. And three, what was the most difficult experience and what was the most painful experience that Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam faced within the tragedy of Karbala. So before we proceed, I ask you to provide me with a loud salawat. So the first point, the verse that we started with are the last verses in Surah Al-Furqan. Beautiful verses, and I urge you to please reflect upon it. Beautiful verses that speak about 12 characteristics that Allah describes Ibadur Rahman with, from which I chose only 4, simply because there are a lot and they require a lot of explanation, but indeed they are beautiful to reflect upon. They're very worthy to reflect upon. The first one, Allah begins by saying wa Ibadur Rahman. You notice that in the Quran, every time Allah begins a surah, what does it start with? Bismillahir Rahman Ar-Rahim, isn't it? Right. Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, he explains Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. What does he say? He says, Ar-Rahman is a specific name that has a general meaning. Ar-Rahim, Imam continues, Ar-Rahim is a general name, but it has a specific meaning. So Ar-Rahman is a specific characteristic. Ar-Rahim is a general characteristic. The first one has a specific characteristic with a general meaning. The second one is a general characteristic with a specific meaning. This is the words of Imam Sadiq alayhi salam. So when it comes to Ar-Rahman, Allah is saying Ibadur Rahman. So He's relating those people to who? To Himself. The first title that He gives Himself, the first name that He gives Himself in the Holy Quran, says what? Ar-Rahman, Ibadur Rahman. So these are my servants, the servants of the most compassionate. The first description is what? The first description, you would notice that Allah would make, say, for example, those الَّذِينَ يُؤْمِنُونَ بِالْغَيْبِ or الَّذِينَ يَقْرَأُونَ. No. وَعِبَادُ الرَّحْمَنِ الَّذِينَ يَمْشُونَ عَلَى الْأَرْضِ هَوْنًا. The servants of the most compassionate, the ones that walk on earth humbly. Allahu Akbar. The first thing He describes about them is what? Physical appearance, the body language. And this is the science of body language is worthy to reflect upon, believe it or not. Many scholars who are experts in the science of body language, they say you can analyze a person's personality or even the state that he or she are in simply from the way they walk. And sometimes they even go further, explaining their facial expressions. But the beautiful thing here is that He's describing the way they walk. Even the way they walk, Allah is complimenting it in the Holy Quran. But walk how? Humbly. Meaning they do not walk with pride. Right? Because sometimes some people have this disease inside their hearts, unfortunately, which is called the disease of pride. And it reflects even on the way they walk. And it's as if they do not see around them anybody. Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam has a beautiful narration. He says, Al-mutakabbir kal-waqif ala jabal. A proud person is a person, it's a riwayah from Imam Ali alayhi salam. A proud person is a person that is standing on top of a mountain. He looks at the people and he sees them small. But they look at him back and they also see him small, right? Because he's standing on a mountain, subhanallah. See? Right? So in that sense, so at-takabbur, in that sense, some people have this sense of pride. And that's why you find a beautiful narration from Rasulullah says what? At-takabbur ala al-mutakabbir ibadah. That being proud, while dealing with a proud person, being proud over that person is ibadah. Meaning when someone is being proud over you and is showing off in front of you, you do not be humble with them. You do not show them the humbleness of Islam. You show them what? Pride. You find that in the narrations of Rasulullah when He talked to His companions the first time they were performing Hajj. What does He tell them to do? I'm sure many of you have been to Hajj. What's mustahab to do in Safa and Marwa? Is to run fast or even jog, right? Fast. Why? Rasulullah would tell them, show the mushrikeen that you are fit, you are in good shape. Another thing, the way you dress in Hajj, what do? Do you cover your shoulders here? No, you don't. You show them because Rasulullah is saying, show them your biceps, show them your triceps, show them how fit the Muslim Ummah is, right? In that sense, and that's why Rasulullah showed that pride in the Ummah. Show that sense of pride. You do not be humble with a person that's showing off. A person that's treating you as if they are higher than you and you are lower than them. Rasulullah says no. You do takabbur over them. And that's considered what? Ibadah. Isn't it? If I'm not mistaken, a riwayah attributed to Imam al-Hasan, the hadith is from Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam. If I'm not mistaken, inshallah, I think it is, where he says that there's a hadith Qudsi by Allah saying what? Al-'azamatu ridai. Greatness is my cloak. وَالْكِبْرِيَاءُ إِزَارِي. And pride is my aba. It's my dress. مَنْ قَاسَمَنِي فِيهِمَا قَسَمْتُهُ. Whoever tries to associate himself with me in this, have a partnership with this pride and greatness, then I will cut him in half. They will be humiliated, right? And that's the sense. So, وَعِبَادُ الرَّحْمَنِ الَّذِينَ يَمْشُونَ عَلَى الْأَرْضِ هَوْنًا. They walk with humbleness, meaning that they are stable in their walk. As Rasulullah is described in his walk, he was neither walking fast nor too slow. No, but just in the middle, right? Maintaining a certain speed of walk, having that sense of humbleness in walk. And then the second characteristic is what? وَإِذَا خَاطَبَهُمُ الْجَاهِلُونَ قَالُوا سَلَامًا. And when the ignorant speak to them, what do they say? Salam. What do they say? Salam. Peace. But Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam comes and says, it's not the salam of salutation. No, it's the salam of wida'. Why? Because you don't want to be associated with an ignorant person. An ignorant person is just gonna seriously mentally break you down. Right? Remember, one of the khulafa of Bani al-Abbas, one of the scholars gave him a very hard time in society. Then he put him in prison. They asked him, how do you want us to torture him? He said, this one, I have a special torture for him. What do you do? He said, nothing. Just put an ignorant, immoral person with him. Argue with him about everything. Just argue with him about everything. Some people, Allahu Akbar, they really... One of my teachers tells me a really interesting incident. He told me one time I was involved in a divorce case. But the good thing about the divorce case, which is not that the divorce was good, but that both the husband and the wife, it was a civil divorce. It was a very calm, peaceful civil divorce. Both of them agreed on a divorce. I sat down and I said to the man, okay, do you have any conditions? Well, she had some conditions. Do you have any conditions? He says, yes. These are my conditions, and as soon as she signs on the conditions that I have, I will recite Surah At-Talaq. No, in the Quran, we have a surah, it's called Surah At-Talaq, Surah the divorce. So my teacher was confused a bit. He said, well, I don't know, I didn't understand exactly what you're saying. He said, well, doesn't she want a divorce? Yes. Well then, as soon as she agrees to the conditions, I will recite Surah At-Talaq. He said, but what does Surah At-Talaq have to do with the divorce? He said, then how am I going to divorce her? My teacher looked at him and he said, my friend, you don't need to recite Surah At-Talaq to give your wife a divorce. He said, yes, of course I do. It says in the Quran, Surah At-Talaq. Aren't you Muslim? Allahu Akbar. He said, yes, I am. He said, okay. He said, so my teacher just he literally wanted to educate the man a little. He looked at him and he said, so basically when people do khatam of the Holy Quran and they recite Surah At-Talaq, does that mean they automatically divorce their wives? He said, Maulana, don't do ghiba on other people, please. You Maulana's... Yeah. I looked at my teacher. I said, just let him recite Surah At-Talaq and you say, why waste your time? See, some people, it's really hard. It's a mental breakdown to deal with. Just say salam in this regard. So the second characteristic, وَإِذَا خَاطَبَهُمُ الْجَاهِلُونَ قَالُوا سَلَامًا. And then says, and by the way, on the topic of jahl, again, as the comment that I said before, the dispute that you find amongst our Shia community, rather than being united under the banner of Ahlul Bayt, is a beautiful hadith. If I'm not mistaken, it's attributed to Imam al-Hadi alayhi salam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. He summarizes this. He says, إِذَا سَكَتَ الْجَاهِلِ مَخْتَلَفَ النَّاسِ. That if an ignorant keeps quiet, then there wouldn't be issues amongst people in society. If only an ignorant keeps quiet, right? Seriously, something that you're not educated on, do not speak of. Because in this regard, you might misguide people without knowing, and you will be asked on the day of Qiyamah in this regard. And then the third characteristic, وَالَّذِينَ يَبِيتُونَ لِرَبِّهِمْ سُجَّدًا وَقِيَامًا أَحْسَنْتُمْ. And those are the ones who spend their night, or a portion of their night, prostrating and standing before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This does not need explanation. We explained it, as we said, Quran beautifully explains Quran in the description of who? The companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The ayah that we said, Muhammadun Rasulullah وَالَّذِينَ مَعَهُ أَشُدَّاءَ الرُّحَمَاء تَرَاهُمْ رُكَّعًا سُجَّدًا. Right? Again, the notion of ibadah. When? The portion of night, when no one is looking and you're all by yourself, it's you and your Allah, your Lord. And then the fourth one, and the final one that we will end with, the characteristics tonight, وَالَّذِينَ إِذَا أَنفَقُوا لَمْ يُسْرِفُوا وَلَمْ يَقْتُرُوا وَكَانَ بَيْنَ ذَلِكَ قَوَامًا. Focus on this one. And then, they are the ones who when they spend, they neither spend wastefully nor stingily, but they are moderate in between. This is a very important one. So they do not perform tabdhir, right? These are the descriptions of who? Ibadur Rahman. This is not the opinion of Maulana or Fulan or your father or your grandfather or your grandma or your mother that tells you do not waste your money. This is the opinion of Allah, as many of us sometimes blame our parents, as we almost think that our parents don't want to provide to us. Wallah, some parents, the amount of hard work they put just to provide for their children, and sometimes the requests that the children have. I personally, does not make sense to me when some children want a pair of shoes that are worth at least $600 to $700. And I blame a parent to buy his child such a pair of shoes. It makes no sense. It absolutely makes no sense. Unless you're doing an investment, that's a different story. But that's a different field, it's not mine. But I'm telling you that a child wearing this, then what is he or she going to wear when they grow older? Then what are they going to wear? I don't know, you're going to buy 2 pairs of jets so they can fly with. That's the only thing that's going to satisfy them. Isn't it? Impossible, right? You have rizq, may Allah increase in your rizq. That's a different story. But if you're a hardworking person, then how is it that you're able to afford such a thing in this regard? Many parents sometimes say, no, I want to provide for my children. Why? Because unfortunately, we live in a society where there's that notion of competition, and social media isn't helping. People are posting stuff that they buy, right? And that really creates that sense of competition. Well, I want my children to be equal to the rest. Well, yes, but that's not the sense of equality that we're talking about here, right? Many people had to struggle, and people need to struggle. It's important to do so. So those are the ones that when we waste. And focus on one thing. We always speak about tabdhir, wasting money, wasting money. I've explained it before. Tabdhir comes from the word what? Badar. Badar is what? Seed. You know what, for example, when you're planting the grass, what do? You throw the seeds. Allah is giving the same exact example. It's almost as if you're throwing your money, like seeds, right? That's haram. Notice that there are so many sins mentioned in the Holy Quran. Some of them are the most ugly sins that Allah talks about in the Holy Quran. But not one of them was associated with the shaitan. Except what? Something that we, unfortunately, in our communities do not look at it as a sin. Tabdhir, wastefulness. Allah says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Inna al-mubaddirina kanu ikhwan al-shayateen. Indeed, the wasteful are the brothers of the shaitan. Do you understand how dangerous that is? Allah talked about stealing, talked about killing in the Quran, talked about adultery, talked about so many sins. He never said that the ones that do this are the brothers of the shaitan. He came to tabdhir and he said what? Inna al-mubaddirina, the wasteful are what? The brothers of the shaitan. Would you want to be associated as one of the family of the shaitan? Do you want to stand in front of Allah on the day of Qiyamah in this? Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, when he was asked about this, is that why are they the brothers of shaitan? You know what he said? Subhanallah. Rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu alaykum ahl al-bayt. See, you want ilm. Where would you find the tafsir for the Quran? No wonder they are adl al-Quran. Where would you find an explanation for our deen if it wasn't for Muhammad and al-Muhammad? Really. Allah knows where we would be. Seriously, you know what he says? He says, Allah associated the wasteful with the shaitan simply because the shaitan was the first person that did tabdhir. He was wasteful. They told him, how ya ibn Rasulullah? He said, with his ilm. Rather than investing in his ilm in the proper direction, he used it in the wrong direction to deceive the people, right? So what does that tell me? That tells me that when I'm doing tabdhir, I'm deceiving someone. Sometimes when I cannot afford something, but I buy it and I have to bite my tongue to wear it, I'm actually deceiving people. They might think that, in that sense, they might think that I'm worth a lot of money when in reality I'm not. And that's the reality. So that's the sense of tabdhir. May Allah guide us all towards that direction. So, and then he says, what? لَمْ يُسْرِفُوا وَلَمْ يَقْتُرُوا. And at the same level, that stinginess is that they are not that also stingy when it comes to spending. Imam Amir al-Mu'minin alayhi salam has a beautiful beautiful narration, wallah. Says what? عَجِبْتُ لِلْبَخِيلِ. I wonder about a stingy, Imam Ali alayhi salam. عَجِبْتُ لِلْبَخِيلِ يَسْتَعْجِلُ الْفَقْرَ الَّذِي مِنْهُ هَرَبْ. He accelerates the poverty that he ran away from. right? A stingy person, well, you ran away from poverty. That stingy, that means you have a lot of money, but you don't want to spend. So that means you're already wealthy, you're good, but you're stingy, you don't want to spend. So he said he accelerates the poverty that he ran away from. But didn't you run away from poverty? Yeah. يستعجل الفقر الذي منه هرب ويفوته الغنى الذي إياه طلب. And he misses out on what? The wealth that he accumulated in his life. Why? Because he doesn't enjoy it. He's too stingy. Doesn't want to enjoy it. فيعيش في الدنيا عيشة الفقراء. So he lives in this world the life of the poor, even though he's what? Wealthy. ويحاسب في الآخرة حساب الأغنياء. But on the day of Qiyamah, he will be questioned as what? As a wealthy. Right? Imam is telling you, so when you have that type of money and you stinge, what difference is it going to make? You're going to be questioned in Qiyamah as what? As a wealthy. So it doesn't matter as much as you stinge in this dunya. In this regard, and these are the characteristics. When it comes to Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam, since we're speaking about Ibadur Rahman, obviously Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam, he was known with his ibadah, and he was known with his zuhud and taqwa, right? That you would reflect on the life of the Imam, and you would notice that it was through his ibadah he was able to cause that sense of awareness in society. And our concern tonight about Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam was he politically active or no, as he's pictured always, that he isolated himself and he was just focused on ibadah. The first proof that our Imam salawatullah wasalamu alayhi was politically active indeed, and he was also socially active, because as we said, some academics even say that even on a social level the Imam was not involved at all, that he was isolating himself. Why? Believe it or not, after the tragedy of Karbala, when the Ahlul Bayt returned back to Medina, Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam did not live in Medina for a very long time. Some suggest that it was for almost a couple of years. But what they did not know is that in the literature of the Ahlul Bayt, we do know where what was the Imam. The Imam was doing a lot of traveling on the outskirts of Medina and Hijaz. And the Imam would constantly visit the grave of his father, Imam Hussein salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. As many of us would always say that the first Za'ir was Jabir ibn Abdullah al-Ansari. But obviously we all know that the first Zuwar were Bani Asad and, Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam, the Ahlul Bayt and Bani Asad. And Imam Zain al-Abidin would constantly go to the ziyarah of the grave of his father, Imam Hussein alayhi salam. The second thing what he did, the Imam, is what? Is that he wanted to focus on the community that lived on the outskirts of the Medina. Because Medina was absolutely under the control of Bani Umayyah. And in this regard, he said what? Let me perform that da'wah on the outside, on the outskirts of Medina. And this is one of the signs of a smart mu'min. Yes, I remember my teacher would always focus on this. He said, if they were to put around you 4 walls, then try to pierce through the sky. Always find a way to spread the message. Always find a way to spread the message of Rasulullah, the message of Haqq in every moment. Exploit the opportunities that are given to you, right? Every opportunity that you have to spread the message of Ahlul Bayt, right? So that people can understand the message. You might not know, you could save a soul one time, right? Imam Zain al-Abidin lived in the outskirts, and many of those tribes, by the way, they are still known until this day in Hijaz that they are Shi'as. And who converted them to Shi'ism? What was the Imam Zain al-Abidin salawatullahi wa salam alayhi. So that's one. 2, you would notice that even before that, is that when people say that Imam wasn't politically active, then what happened to the khutbah of Imam Zain al-Abidin in the court of Yazid? Is that, do you think Yazid would have hesitated to kill the Imam? Imam Zain al-Abidin? Not at all. Yazid performed one of the most brutal tragedies in history. So you want to convince me that if the Imam objects to Yazid, the Yazid wouldn't kill him? Of course he would. But the Imam, what did he do? He did object to Yazid. You find that his sermon, his wonderful sermon in Khutbah al-Sham, that he even begins with Tawheed. الحمد لله الذي لا بداية له والدائم الذي لا نفاذ له والأول الذي لا أول لأوليته والآخر الذي لا آخرية له قدر الليالي والأيام وقسم فيما بينهما الأقسام فتبارك الله الملك العلام أيها الناس أحذركم من الدنيا وما فيها. I warn you from this dunya and what's in it. فإنها دار فناء وزوال. It's an eternal world. It's going to end. تنتقل بأهلها من حال إلى حال قد أفنت القرون الماضية والأمم الخالية الذين كانوا أطول منكم أعمارا وأكثر منكم آثارا أفنتهم أيدي الزمان واحتمت عليهم الأفاعي والديدان. Go look at the prior nations before you. They're 6 feet under, that they've been eaten. Their bodies have been eaten. أفتطمعون في العيش بعدهم? Well, what? Do you think that you're going to live longer than they did? هيهات لا بد لكم من اللحوق بهم, that you will indeed follow them. فتداركوا ما بقي من أعماركم بصالح الأعمال. So why don't you take advantage of what is remaining from your life and do some good deeds, some عمل, right? فكأني بكم قد نقلتم من قصوركم إلى قبوركم, because it's as if I can see you going from your palaces and castles and fancy mansions to your qubur. Everybody's going to go to a qabr, regardless where you are. Everybody, and sometimes, sorry Muhsin, but I have to sometimes, Believe it or not, I remember one of the most shocking experiences. I was lecturing one time, and just like your culture, which is wonderful, by the way, one of the most beautiful things is going to the qabristan. May Allah lengthen your life, because if you do this with your dead, then your children will do this with you. And it's wonderful that you guys uphold this culture. 10 nights in Muharram, I don't know if it even extends, but wonderful culture, by the way. It's honestly very touching. And it's something that, I've done it before in other communities. And so I remember one time I went to the qabristan, and while I was walking around the graves, I saw one of the tombstones on a grave. I kid you not. The name was in small carvings. And on top of the name, it said engineer. I kid you not. The name was in small carving, but on top of the name, it was huge. Like engineer. My humble question was, why would you want your title to be on your tombstone, on your qabr? So when you go down to your grave, Munkar and Nakir are going to come, Munkar, and you tell them, hey, please stop. Before you ask me, I'm just going to discuss the dimensions of the qabr. They're not, Maybe you guys shouldn't be standing here. There's going to be a post that might fall. Well, I don't understand. Well, what's the engineer have to do with it? This longing for this obsession with titles. Some people are obsessed with it. But no, you cannot even call them with their own name. Call them with their own name, it's a crime. No, where's my title? In that sense. So believe it or not, Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam was causing that sense of awareness. Where? In Sham, right after the killing of his own father, Imam Hussein salawatullahi wa salam. So that's the second one. The third one, you would notice that Imam Zain al-Abidin would go to Hajj every single year. And we all know that, the famous incident with the Amawi Khalifa, Hisham ibn Abdul Malik, right? When he wanted to enter and take the black stone, but he couldn't. And then the people saw Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam. And the Imam would take advantage of meeting people from different parts of the world in Hajj and speaking to them about the tragedy of Imam Hussein salawatullahi wa salam alayhi. And that was something that he would do on yearly basis. Fourth, Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam, what did he do? He found an opportunity in exporting the Ahlul Bayt school of thought to the rest of the world. How? Through buying slaves. The Imam would literally buy slaves every year. And what would he do is that he would give them hawza courses for 1 year. He would graduate them as scholars. And then after a year, when they're ready, he would give them an amount of money, and he would tell them, go back to where you were captured from and preach to the people about the school of thought of Ahlul Bayt. The Imam saw this opportunity in this regard. The fifth one is what? When you look at Sahifa Sajjadiyah, it wasn't only just a'mal. No. If you focus on the du'as of Imam, you would find that there are two parts of messages. Some of them are subliminal messages that are absolutely political. And the second were clear messages that are political, such as Dua Ahlul Thughur. If you have time tonight or one day, go listen and read the translation of Dua Ahlul Thughur. Dua Ahlul Thughur is absolutely political. And one of the most wonderful and touching du'as that, for example, in the Middle East, they always play that dua. It is important that we always listen. It's a part of our culture, right? That we always listen to this dua. Dua ahlul thughur. Sixth point is what? Is that you would notice that the Imam, even through his dua, he would focus on the notion of what? On freely worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because Bani Umayyah, they made sure to spread the notion of predestination. That it is Allah that chose for us to be khulafa, and it is Allah that would keep us here. And I wouldn't continue more because then it's going to extend more, but I would just like to say one thing. Resulting from all this, you would notice that one of the main things that the Imam did to spread the tragedy of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, because believe it or not, there was a time where even the name of Imam Hussein was not allowed to be mentioned, that every time someone would mention the name of Imam Hussein alayhi salam in front of the Imam would weep and cry as if the tragedy of Karbala just occurred now. And then when the people would ask why, he would start explaining to them what happened in Karbala. And one of those people is Abu Hamza al-Thamali Ridwanullahi ta'ala alayh. As Abu Hamza al-Thamali one day walked into the house of the Imam and he saw him in his mihrab, and our Imam was praying and doing his ibadah. And then he was crying. Abu Hamza al-Thamali asked the Imam, "What is wrong with you, ya Imam? This is not the first time that you face such a tragedy amongst the Ahlul Bayt. It is you, the Ahlul Bayt, that are known to sacrifice, that each one of you was killed and each one of you was martyred. Ya Imam, why is it that now that you keep on weeping and crying?" The Imam replied to Abu Hamza al-Thamali, he said, "Yes, Ya Abu Hamza, you're right, that each one of them was killed. Each one of them, one of us was martyred. But have you ever heard, Ya Hamza, that one of the women, any of the women of the Ahlul Bayt, was taken as a captive, Ya Hamza?" The same Abu Hamza al-Thamali one time asked the Imam, he said, "Ya Imam, what was the most painful thing that ever occurred in Karbala?" The Imam, the Abu Hamza said, "Is it the killing of your uncle Abbas alayhi salam? For from what you've told me that he was killed in such a brutal way." The Imam replied saying, "No." He said, "Ya Imam, was it the killing of your father Hussein?" He said, "No." He said, "Ya Imam, was it the fact that you had to look at the head of your own father Hussein on top of a spear?" He said, "No." He said, "Then what is it, Ya Imam?" The Imam said, "Ash-Sham, Ash-Sham, Ash-Sham." He said, "Ya Aba Hamza, it is when the women and the children of the Ahlul Bayt were being taken as captives into the court of Yazid. Ya Aba Hamza, it is when my aunt Zainab had to be sitting on back of a camel entering Kufa, and the strangers are looking at the faces of the women of Al Muhammad. Ya Hamza, do you know what happened then? Aba Hamza, do you know what happened then? That my aunt Zainab asked a man to pay off the man that was carrying the head of my father Hussein, so he can uncover the head of my father Hussein, so people can look at the head of my father and the face of my father and stop looking at the face of the women and children of Bani Hashim." Ya Aba Hamza, do you know that when we entered Kufa, people came to us offering us sadaqah, and then my aunt Zainab would take it away from the hands of the children, even though they were thirsty and hungry, telling them, "Sadaqah is haram on us. Do not take from such people." إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون وسيعلم الذين ظلموا آل محمد أي منقلب ينقلبون والعاقبة للمتقين. اللهم كن لوليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا، حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا، برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين وصل اللهم على محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين. Okay, right away? Okay, so can you please...
Assalamu alaikum. We'll have a short Q&A session because we're running out of time, so we'll try to finish as soon as possible. So this will work is, what we'll do is I'll read out the questions which we got from WhatsApp, then I'll go to the ladies. Ladies have their own mic, they will ask a question, and the gents. So I will repeat this process a few times. So the first question for the Sheikh.
Yes, inshallah.
Sorry.
Yeah. Just wait, let's wait until the people leave and
Okay.
relax. It's okay. Let's just wait until yeah, I want to. So let's just wait until the people leave. And,
Sure. If you can settle down, then we can start. The session for Q&A should not be recorded, should not be on YouTube.